So, Kate, servant leadership is such an
Mhm.
important foundational ingredient in building trust. And
That's right.
trust is really that key dimension in any sort of long-term healthy relationship. What's your
Yep.
perspective? Why is servant leadership so important there?
Well, it's so important because servant leadership is really founded on the definition of kind of two things, right? It's how you define service and how you define leadership. And so in my experience, it comes down to getting to know people. It's a very human altitude and very one-to-one, and oftentimes takes quite a bit of time investment, right? Because you need to form those relationships. So servant leadership for me in particular is it has been important because my background is really founded in the marriage of business and psychology. I studied both in undergrad, have carried kind of the love of, well, it's really professionally transitioned into customer behavior. But in leading teams, it's really it shows up in how I develop relationships with those that I lead, formally or informally, right? And stakeholder management is just as important, but the servant leadership piece, it really comes down to that human altitude and better understanding how do we serve an individual and coach them to their potential or the next objective on their list. And it takes that kind of time investment as well.
Yeah, and when you create that kind of trust, what I found as a leader too, you're so visible, right? People are
That's right.
watching and they're really feeding off of that behavior. And so when you start demonstrating that empowerment and you start showing that vulnerability, which are all part of that servant leadership approach, it seems like it's contagious. And so what happens is then the behaviors across the team start resembling that a little bit more. Have you found that as well?
I have. I think that's a really great point, and this becomes increasingly important to leaders of leaders, right? So as organizations grow, as you are developing your leaders into higher altitudes of leadership, and they start taking on responsibility for other leaders as well. Demonstrating that is so critical to not only building trust with those that you lead directly, but just at an organization level, right? Kind of living with that transparency and vulnerability in as many interactions as you get with everyone throughout the team, but especially for those directly in your organization who you're spending the most time with.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate force multiplier.
It is. Absolutely. It is. And I mean, you see that um, in different contexts, right? So none of us is perfect, right? I haven't nailed absolutely everything that I go out and try to achieve. That's not possible. And so kind of living in the, for example, I have every week, I have a team lead meeting for my specific leaders, and how are we sharing things we've learned that prior week that only happens through trial and error, right? I had a conversation that went sideways. How do we manage and adjust to that? How do we get to know that stakeholder better for next time? How do we, et cetera, right? We've tried path A, we learned this, and now we're going to try path B, and we're sharing that across each other. And that kind of brings us all down to the same level, right? So it's demonstrating that by way of initiating the conversation and being just as transparent with everyone around you.